Madame Anne Calteux, representative of the European Commission in Luxembourg, Professor Marie-Hélène Jobin, Vice Rector of the University of Luxembourg, dear members of the Pierre Werner family, dear Mr. Robert Goebbels, former MEP member, former minister, Excellencies, ladies, gentlemen, dear friends, in keeping with their vocation of transmitting values and knowledge and opening up new horizons, the Center Europe Direct at the University of Luxembourg, which is a public history program co-funded by the European Commission, the Pierre Werner Institute, the representation of European Commission in Luxembourg and their partners, Luxembourg Centre for Contemporary and Digital History, the Jean Monnet Foundation for Europe at the University of Lausanne, Switzerland, and the City of Esch-sur-Alzette, are pleased to welcome you to the conference debate entitled The European Union at the Crossroads, with outstanding speakers, Mr. Pat Cox, Mrs. Anne Calteux, and Mr. Robert Goebbels. A last-minute unforeseen circumstances changed the program slightly, given that Mr. Pat Cox's flight has been delayed. This is also Europe. He will intervene only in the second part of the conference, and we will have also two question and answer sessions with the audience. In a difficult socio-economic context and a geopolitical environment marked by uncertainty, the European elections scheduled from 6 to 9 June 2024 in the 27 EU member states represent a crucial moment with many issues at stake for democracy, solidarity, and cohesion on our continent. To face up to these unprecedented transnational challenges, Europe must not only revive the lessons of history to empower countries, regions, and communities, but above all, to encourage the participation and commitment of citizens, among whom the younger generations occupy a place of choice. Dialogue, debate, and critical thinking are more important than ever. Our event today include also the opening of a multilingual documentary exhibition entitled Shaping Europe, the Story of European Elections, created and made available for us by the Historical Archive of the European Parliament. And I would like to welcome also my colleague Etienne Deschamps from this Historical Archives. The European Union at the Crossroads, so this event, is part of the current edition of the public event series, The Month of Europe in Esch-sur-Alzette, Les Mois de l'Europe à Esch, organized from March to July 2024 by Europe Direct at the University of Luxembourg, the City of Esch-sur-Alzette, the representation of the European Commission in Luxembourg, and our numerous partners. The event that is now started is live streamed through the YouTube channel of the university, thanks to the Media Center of the university. It will be also recorded by the same Media Center, and the recording will be published on the research infrastructure of the University of Luxembourg dedicated to European studies. I will have the chance to introduce our main speakers, but I would like to invite to take the floor Professor Marie-Hélène Jobin, Vice Rector of the University of Luxembourg, for the official welcome address. Thank you.
Distinguished guests, dear speakers, and there are still more to come. Ladies and gentlemen, Bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je pense qu'il y a plusieurs d'entre nous qui parlent en français. Alors, je vais faire ma présentation en anglais, mais je voulais quand même pouvoir célébrer le multilinguisme de ce merveilleux pays qu'est le Luxembourg. The upcoming European elections hold profound meaning. Although I am not entitled to vote, as I am a new resident of Europe, I can nevertheless contribute to this important decision in other ways. As we confront unprecedented societal and transnational challenges, now more than ever, dialogue, debate, and critical thinking serve as our guiding beacons through these turbulent times. Thank you for being here with us tonight and contribute to this discussion. Of course, I extend my deepest gratitude to all the organizations involved in shaping this event. In alignment with their core mission of disseminating values and expanding intellectual landscapes, the Center Europe Direct at the University of Luxembourg, the Institut Pierre Werner, the City of Esch-sur-Alzette, along with their esteemed partners, the Luxembourg Centre for Contemporary and Digital History, the C²DH, the Jean Monnet Foundation for Europe in Switzerland, and the representation of European Commission in Luxembourg, take pleasure in welcoming you for a stimulating conference program. Europe at the Crossroads promises to be a moment where ideas collide, perspective will be intertwined, and solutions emerge, we wish. For my part, I would like to underline the key role of higher education institutions are playing in shaping the future of Europe. Indeed, as Europe stands at a decisive moment in its history, it's imperative to acknowledge the role that universities play in guiding our continent towards a prosperous and democratic future. Universities are not just institutions of learning and research. We support students in their understanding of the world and train them to become citizens who can make informed decisions. In addition, universities are a vibrant hub of innovation, driving social progress, sustaining democracy, and fostering scientific collaboration and transcend borders. Higher education institutions foster economic development and, most of all, impact on well-being and social transformation. It's also an industry, yes, the word industry, that attract and contribute to retain high-profile talents from international. Universities also play a role in scientific diplomacy. We truly have the capacity to build bridges instead of walls. In addition, by promoting student exchanges, cultural immersion programs, dual degrees or joint degree program, international cooperation initiatives, universities can cultivate a new generation of global citizens who understand, respect, and celebrate cultural diversity. Yet, as we navigate an era defined by rapid technological progress and geopolitical complexities, we must also confront pressing questions. How do we ensure that scientific advancements are used for the collective good? The concept of dual use presents a challenge that universities must struggle with, balance innovation with ethical considerations, preventing also misuse of technology, and at the same time preserving the sovereignty of Europe and protect it. Moreover, in the landscape where global competition is fierce, how does Europe's ecosystem measure up against powerhouses like Asia or North America, particularly in strategic areas such as innovation, research, and development? Once again, universities are key actors in this battle. Sustaining Europe's competitiveness demands strategic investment in cutting-edge research, entrepreneurship, and calls for a strong collaboration between academia, industry, and governments. As university and their tech transfer mechanisms hold key roles for the competitive of Europe, we call for this collaboration between states and also with university. In conclusion, universities convey multiple voices, and universities are a beacon for mutual understanding, ethic, peace, prosperity, and competitiveness. The University of Luxembourg, as the sole university in the country, has even more responsibilities. For all these good reasons, on behalf of the entire rectorate teams of the University of Luxembourg, Europe Direct, as well as C²DH, I am delighted to open this conference, and I would like especially to convey my thanks to Elena, who organized with all the other partners this event. Thank you very much.
Before inviting one of our other keynote speakers to take the floor, I would like to show you what we have realized together with our partners, especially with Jean Monnet Foundation for Europe. This is exhibition of posters entitled A Graphical Image of Europe that we inaugurated on 21st of May on the occasion of EU Lab, a greater regional workshop for students. And this exhibition, you see a picture from the inauguration, will be opened until the 15th of June to the Luxembourg Learning Centre in order to give the occasion of the general public to discover all these original and undisclosed historical sources that the Foundation Jean Monnet for Europe gathered in its repository. I would like to invite now to take the floor Mrs. Anne Calte, the representative of the European Commission in Luxembourg. So as you see, she accepted to give the closing remarks, but in the present structure of the conference, Madame Calte will open it with introductory remarks on the topic EU at a crossroads. Madame Calte, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elena. I just saw my phone is here. Take it away. Okay, it's on mute. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to address this audience. Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for having organized this conference and at this really crucial moment. And I really like the title, Europe at a Crossroads. It is true, we are today at a crossroads. I think you had already used this title during a precedent conference cycle, but today, just 1 month ahead before the European elections, it makes total sense to talk about this as Europe at a crossroads. You have said it, Elena, Marie-Hélène as well. We are just a few weeks before the European elections, and you also mentioned the context, a complex socio-economic and geopolitical landscape. We hear this all the time when we now go to conferences. This context, it is very familiar to us, but let's not forget that a few years ago we didn't talk about it. We didn't say we have a war raging in front of our borders. We didn't talk of the consequences, the long-lasting consequences of a sanitary crisis. We didn't speak about our industry, which is lagging behind the American or Chinese industry, and yet it is today a really brutal and stark reality. And so it is important to hold conferences like this, to talk about it and to exchange on how we see Europe's role in this really complicated context. I think we can all say that Europe is being tested today. I think we don't exaggerate when we say that. We are all tested also as citizens. And I think we should be aware of the fact that nothing is granted anymore and that the world has changed. I always say, for me personally, I don't know if you share this, there is a world before COVID and after COVID. Because with COVID, really, we noticed how vulnerable we are, that we are highly dependent from other countries when it comes to critical materials, be it the healthcare sector, be it critical raw materials for the production of essential goods and services, be it our economic sovereignty. The word sovereignty, you have mentioned it already. It is today at stake. And I would like to quote from the recently published report by Enrico Letta. Enrico Letta, the former Italian Prime Minister, he has gained a lot of visibility over the last months because he has been tasked by the European Commission to publish a report on the single market. And this report was awaited with a lot of interest by all of us, because we know already that the content will influence the working program of the next Commission. That is the case. And I would like to give you a quotation which I think sums up everything which we would like to discuss with you this evening. So Enrico Letta in this report says, "The European Union stands at a crucial juncture." I think he meant at a crossroads. The European Union is faced with multifaceted economic threats that ask for a strategic and cohesive response. Recognizing the evolving landscape of external economic security threats, a comprehensive approach to enhance the European Union's resilience to support its economic competitiveness and safeguard its interests is imperative. So there we have it all in a nutshell. It's about an encompassing response because all the problems we are facing are multifaceted. There are so many dimensions to our today's world that we need this strategic, cohesive, and all-encompassing horizontal response. That's not easy, we do agree, but I think we have to be clear-eyed about our world today, about this world which is and has become much more contested and geopolitical. Jean-Claude Juncker already called for a geopolitical commission, and today we have this geopolitical commission. We just don't have the choice anymore because our world has become geopolitical. And nowadays we talk about sovereignty, about open strategic autonomy, about resilience, all these buzzwords, but they are actually what we have to strive for if we as the European Union want to stay a leader in our today's world. And I spoke about Enrico Letta. I would also like to mention Mario Draghi, another very prominent Italian citizen, who is working currently on another report, which we are waiting for with great interest, and which is the report on the European Union's competitiveness. So we have the single market on one hand, and on the other hand, we have our competitiveness. And we all know that our competitiveness is under threat from countries like the United States, but also China, BRICS, India. We have many contestants out there who are also, and that makes it so complex, our partners. So we cannot ignore them. So we speak about de-risking, not about decoupling, because we need them also for our own competitiveness. So we think in terms of partnership, open partnership, but we stopped being naive. And this is new for the Europe we are living in today. And I'm very much looking forward to the next working program of our Commission to see what will be taken away from the Enrico Letta report and from Mario Draghi's report, which will come out in the next weeks. So, yes, the upcoming elections, this is really what we are waiting for now. We are all waiting with great interest what the outcome will be. I think it is fair to say that they represent more than just a political event. They are themselves a pivotal moment, a crossroads, because we all know that we have to take into consideration the rise of populism, the rise of disinformation, and we will see how far this will have an impact on the voters' choices. Many people say you will see there will be this massive rise from the extreme right. Others say, let's just wait, let's see what will come out. I think the only option is to talk about what is of concern. Not just observe what's going on, not just wait for the result, but become active as citizens, be interested, and yes, get informed what's going out on social media, get an informed opinion about your view also, and let's all take part in the dialogue because it's about our future. And I think it's also very important in the next weeks and even beyond the European elections to draw upon the lessons of history. And that's why I really welcome the fact that also the University of Luxembourg is so much engaged in our discussions about the European Union, because the European Union is a project, a historical project. And I think that's very important also to remind of when we talk to our younger citizens. They very often don't know where the European Union comes from. The European Union is not an integral part of the school curriculum in Luxembourg, which always surprises me, Luxembourg being one of the founding member states and C²DH institutions. So they must learn a lot about where we come from, also what the position of Luxembourg in the European Union is, and also that they have this feeling of being proud about it, because we can be proud to be European citizens. We should be proud to to have the right to live in such a rich, enriching society where we are respected for who we are. And that is very, very important. So history serves as our guide, offering us insights into the resilience and fortitude of nations. As we have seen in the past, Europe is always at its best when we have to face crises together. And yes, in the face of adversity, because I think we can use this word, adversity. Today, there are many threats coming up from various parts of the world. And history also reminds us of the importance of unity, of solidarity, and of cooperation in times of crisis. It also reminds us of the origin of our European Union, which is a project of peace, of prosperity, and of solidarity. And this is still true. And I think we have to remind ourselves of that even 70 years later, it is still a project of peace, solidarity, and prosperity. Even if today people say, now we are investing in our defense capacities. Yes, to uphold peace. It's still a project of peace. So we use the means differently, but we stay true to our aims and to our initial view about what the European Union should be. But we also have to look now ahead, and we have to prepare ourselves for what is yet to come, because we know that there will be new crises, and some of them will surprise us. We can always be as well prepared as we can, but we will never be prepared for everything. So let's just put all the chances on our side to increase our preparedness, our readiness to face the next crisis, because they will come. The EU has changed dramatically during the last 5 years, during the mandate of President Ursula von der Leyen, because we have realized that we are vulnerable in many regards, including critical sectors which I have named before. And we have also realized that we need more commitment, more investment when it comes to economic security and defense. And it was just unthinkable, I think, 5 years ago at the beginning of the current institutional cycle, that today we are massively investing into a new defense and security architecture. Who would have thought that? And in parallel, we are also massively investing in our reinforced competitiveness in our industry. We are talking about re-industrialization. We have adopted the Net Zero Industry Act to give economic operators in Europe the chance to produce more easily critical clean technology as a reply to the American IRA, Inflation Reduction Act. We will see if it is enough, if it is ambitious enough. A lot is at stake, and we want to hold our industry here in the European Union, and we want to remain an attractive place for economic operators. Yes, so I think what we need to do is to bring these lessons learned together, but also our greater maturity, because we have become more mature over the last years, and we have to feed this into the new institutional cycle. And let's not forget our renewed solidarity, which has also grown over the last years. Although there are some cracks in it also here within our European Union, I think we have to face that. That is a reality, but that's also part of our diversity, and that's what Europe is. One other thing which I think is really important is that we don't get too much concentrated on us, on the European Union, but we have to look beyond our borders. And that's what we mean when we talk about open strategic autonomy. This is looking for new partners, reliable, trustworthy partners. So it's the end of this naive area we were involving in before. We are building up partnerships, but we want to know who we are building them with. And we are also always trying now to protect our own interests. And that's what it's about when we talk about economic security. It's this also new buzzword which we use a lot now, and which we now have to fill with life. There is a new European economic security strategy out. It's a strategy, yes, but it's also accompanied by new regulation. This will need some time to kick in so that people will actually see the difference, but it has to be, I think, in the new mandate of the Commission, it will be something which we will talk about a lot in the next years to come. And then, and above all, what we are talking about, it's people. It's us here, sitting here, talking together about the European Union. The strengths of Europe are its people. They need to participate in this project. We speak a lot now about the citizen, active participation, active democracy. There are new instruments at the European level which have been set in place as a consequence of the Conference on the Future of Europe. Citizen panels, they are now part of our decision-making process in Brussels, and it's good because we have to listen to what citizens have to say, and also the younger people. So we always make sure we have enough young people in these citizens panels. And I think we have to keep alive their engagement, their commitment into shaping a better future, not only now in view of the European elections, but way beyond. This needs to be something which distinguishes our citizens as regard to citizens from other parts of the world. I think this keen interest in where we are living, in our common values. I cannot repeat enough the importance of our common values. For some of you, it might sound like a void concept, a little bit of blah, blah, but it's so important that we also think about what does it mean for me, the European values? Do I live these values? What can I do in order to fill them with life? That is something I think we have to ask ourselves. We have had the 9th of May, Europe Day, which is the perfect period to have these reflections, and also now in view of the European elections, we have to get interested in what is the European Union for us and what we can do also to fill it with life and to be proud of our European society. So when I speak about active and informed citizens, I definitely speak also about our younger generations. They have a very important part to play to construct our inclusive society together. We know that they want to live more than us, more than past generations in a society which is inclusive, which respects all the differences people can have. So yes, that is very important. But I must say I was a bit disappointed no later than this morning when I read that the latest Eurobarometer has shown that the Luxembourgish young people are with only 41% the least interested in going to vote in the European elections. I was very disappointed because what does this mean? I will not stop at this finding that, yes, okay, they are the last in the European Union. We have to understand why that is the case. In a founding member state and in a country which is the seat to European institutions, what does it mean? do they take everything for granted? Do they not get the right answers to their questions? Do we have to engage more with them? Yes, I think we have to engage more with young people. I myself, I try it a lot. I go a lot into schools. I really do a lot of outreach activities with young people, but apparently it's not enough. So I have received the message. I know that we can all do more. I think also that young people are probably much more critical towards the decisions that adult people take nowadays. So we have to involve them more into our decision-making process. And also, I think we have to make it clear to them that they are very lucky to live here in Luxembourg, in such a beautiful country, which holds democracy and mutual respect very high. And I think they also have to become aware of this. And yes, to be proud also to be a European citizen beyond the fact to be a Luxembourgish citizen. So, as we approach the European elections, let's recommit together to the principles that bind us together in Europe: democracy, human rights, the rule of law, and let's seize this opportunity to reaffirm our shared values and to forge a path forward that is rooted in solidarity and in cooperation. And I could personally witness a very beautiful moment of belonging to all these values and of belonging to the European society just a week ago in front and inside of the European Parliament, when, with some of you present this evening, we were celebrating Europe Day. It was a wonderful day, and so many people came to visit. Over 7,000 came. It was vibrant. I really still feel the vibes of this day. It was wonderful, and I could really see this interest in the European Union, and it really gave me hope. So, in view of the European elections, but also way beyond the European elections, I think this evening, being here with you together, talking about the challenges of the European Union is the right way to spend an evening together. And yes, let's be aware of this right we have to go to vote, to be able to have an active part in shaping our society. And yes, we should not take it lightly. We should vote for people who represent our values in the European Parliament, because let's not forget that the European Parliament plays a major role also as regards the composition of the European Commission, because the president of the next Commission and every one of the commissioners will have to be approved by the European Parliament. So it is in our interest that in the European Parliament we have people who are actually aware of the challenges that are out there and of the importance to find well-balanced solutions to all of them. So you can all be part of all of this, of the construction of the next institutional cycle. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Skelte, for your insightful words. You spoke about the future of Europe, and now I would like to invite to take a floor a great European and one of the personality who shape one of the fundamental freedoms of the European Union, the freedom of circulation. Robert Goebbels is the architect of the Schengen agreements, which entered in the acquis communautaire as output of the freedom of circulation in the EU. Mr. Robert Goebbels is a journalist, a former politician in Luxembourg, and a former member of the European Parliament for the Luxembourg Socialist Workers' Party. Over the course of his career, he had held senior positions, including General Secretary of LSAP, President of the Luxembourg Association of Journalists, Councillor of City of Luxembourg, State Secretary for Foreign Affairs, Foreign Trade and Cooperation, and State Secretary for Small Business. Mr. Goebbels was also Minister for the Economy, Minister for Public Works, and Minister for Transport, and also for Energy. In 1999, he was elected as a member of the European Parliament, Vice President of the Parliamentary Group of the Party of European Socialists, and the Vice President of the Socialist Group in the European Parliament. In March 2016, the Luxembourgish government appointed Mr. Goebbels as representative of the Board of Governors of the Asia-Europe Foundation. As mentioned, Mr. Robert Goebbels is the negotiator, shaper, and signatory of the Schengen Agreement in Luxembourg. So, Mr. Goebbels, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, dear Elena, you have been too kind to me, but it's always good to hear that one has had an existence before today. Ladies and gentlemen, we Europeans live in the smallest part of the world. We are, in fact, an appendix to the much larger Asian landmasses. Europe is, in fact, not a continent in any geographical sense. We are a part of the Eurasian plate and have imprecise borders with both Asia and Africa. Geologically, the rocks of Turkey share a common history with those of the rest of Europe, while rock in what we call the Near East originate in Africa. What we call proudly our Europe is unfortunately divided into many states, not always living in peace together. European history is the result of an uncountable number of wars. But global history also shows that our part of the world shaped human civilization through culture, science, inventions, and technological progress, mostly generated in Europe by Europeans. The same Europeans brought also brutal colonization and many bloody wars to the rest of the world. After 2 world wars started by Europeans, but affecting nations all over the planet, there was an outcry in Europe: never again. This never again gave birth to one of the most innovative political constructions in human history, the European Union. It began humbly with a common market for coal and steel. Coal was in these years the main source of energy. Steel was the backbone for construction, but also for weaponry. As you know, the countries starting this common venture were France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg. My tiny country was invited because Luxembourg produced then as much steel as the Netherlands and more than Italy. The political motivation behind this first European community was the attempt to breach the German-French antagonism, which triggered so many wars in the 19th and the 20th century. The idea of Jean Monnet worked. The common market for coal and steel was extended to all goods and services, creating, thanks to increasing exchanges, more wealth, more jobs, and more solidarity between the founding nations. This success attracted others. The first to join were Great Britain, Ireland, and Denmark in 1973, followed by Greece in 81, Spain, Portugal in 86, Austria, Sweden, and Finland in 95. Followed by the big enlargement of 2004, which brought 10 new member states, mostly former socialist republics, followed by Romania and Bulgaria in 2007, Croatia in 2013. Then came Brexit. The not-so-united kingdom left the EU. A divorce that weakened the Union, but didn't bring back an imperial status for the UK. Brexit, as all economic indicators show, was a vast failure and left Britain in an increasing mess. Ladies and gentlemen, the 27 actual member states are not the United States of Europe. The European Union is based on the principle of sovereign equality of all its members, with the ambition of creating an ever closer union among the peoples of Europe. I quoted from the preamble of the Treaty on European Union, recalling, and I quote, the historic importance of the ending of the division of the European continent and the necessity to deepen the solidarity between their people while respecting their history, their culture, and their traditions. Seen from the rest of the world, the EU is widely perceived as the entity where human rights, fundamental freedom, social rights are best preserved. As Ann Coulter said, we can be proud about this. Together, the 27 member states are next to the US and China a major economic power, and we enjoy the wealthiest internal market in the world. The euro, the common currency to 20 countries, is the most attractive currency after the dollar, representing a quarter of global reserves. And the EU is the biggest provider of international development aid and gives assistance to numerous countries throughout the world, something we can be proud of too. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me a short digression. As Helena just mentioned, I entered the Luxembourg government in 1984 as Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and some additional things. One of my very first duties was to chair a small intergovernmental conference aiming at progressively abolishing controls at the common borders of Germany, France, and the Benelux countries. We quickly found a common ground. I invited for a signing ceremony in June 1985 in Schengen, a little spot on the Moselle River where the borders of France, Germany, and the Benelux are joining. Schengen has become the founding treaty for free movements of people in Europe. What started as an experience among 5 states encountered an enormous success all over Europe. Today, 29 states share a common area of freedom and security without internal frontiers. Not all the member states are participating in Schengen. The UK and Ireland didn't adhere. Cyprus cannot join as an internal border is cutting the islands in two parts, which is also Ireland's problem. But Norway, Iceland, Liechtenstein, and even Switzerland, Mr. Ambassador, became members of Schengen. Schengen allows every year some 2 billion citizens, to cross internal borders without being controlled by custom or police officers. 4 million Europeans cross every working day to neighboring countries in order to work there. Here in Luxembourg, there are 230,000, as you know. As the Schengen area has a common visa policy, every year up to 20 million foreigners visit Europe with a Schengen visa, allowing them to travel freely in 29 countries. This is one of the reasons why the EU is the first tourist destination in the world. Especially people from Asia love Schengen visas. With the migration crisis and terrorist attacks in many European countries, some politicians claim now to reintroduce controls at the internal borders of the Schengen area. But in order to abolish free circulation, a change of the EU treaty would be required. Our Article 77 states clearly, and I quote, "The Union shall develop a policy with a view to A, ensuring the absence of any controls on persons, whatever their nationality, when crossing internal borders." Not only Europeans, also people from all over the world can cross our internal borders. B, carrying out checks on persons and efficient monitoring of the crossing of external borders. C, the gradual introduction of an integrated management system for external borders, where we are a little bit lacking still. Unquote. Great Britain was never a partner in Schengen, was in theory always in control of its borders. But borders are no absolute barrier. Despite maintaining controls, the UK suffered during all those years from illegal immigration, from crimes and terrorism. Since Brexit, illegal immigration has even increased. Ladies and gentlemen, up to now, I insisted mainly on the positive sides of the European integration process. Unfortunately, there is not only butter on Europe's bread. The EU is an economic giant, but a political dwarf. We are rather strong in soft power, but we are not a superpower like the US, China, and some others. Our main problem is that within the EU, the integrative forces came to a halt. Brexit was occupying and blocking the Union for more than 3 years. The migration crisis showed that there is not enough solidarity between member states. Some new members accept big transfers from the EU budget but avoid burden sharing. Obviously, some former People's Republic took a shortcut to populist republics. Before the Great Enlargement of 2004, the political mantra was deepening before enlarging. But the treaties were not adapted in order to allow a smoother functioning of the European institutions. Neither the Nice Treaty nor the Lisbon Treaty achieved the deepening goal. One example, the European Commission is constituted by one national of each member state. The president-elect has blind dates with 26 candidates selected by the different capitals. Each commissioner must get a concrete attribution, but there are not enough serious political jobs to fill in. More and more commissioners get fancy titles like Vice President for protecting the European way of life, whatever that means, but the title exists. There are commissioners playing golf as main occupation. The European Union cannot continue like this. Imagine a commission with 35 and more members. We need institutional reforms, a smaller but stronger commission. We need better decision-making in the Council and no more vetoes in foreign affairs. The UK, when they were still a member of Europe, vetoed more than 200 times decisions on foreign policy, more than 200 vetoes. Brexit was a warning and a lesson for a lot of anti-Europeans from the extreme right and the extreme left. Even in France, the extreme right abandoned the claim to leave the euro. But a badly needed institutional reform is not in sight. Such a process is as difficult as cumbersome. First, an intergovernmental conference of the 27 members must be established. Then the 27 must adopt unanimously a draft treaty, which must be ratified by the European Parliament and 27 national parliaments, and with at least a referendum in Ireland. I'm convinced that we need a common house in Europe, a concept coined by Gorbachev. The European Union cannot be a closed shop, must stay open to all candidates fulfilling the democratic criteria. But before any further enlargement of the actual house, we first need to consolidate its foundations. And above all, we need new rules about financing the European Union. The European Union has a budget which represents about 1 percentage point of the combined GDP of the 27 states. 1 percentage point. This is ridiculously low. The US budget is around 30% of their GDP. The budget of the Federal Republic is above 40% of German GDP. Even the budget of the Swiss Confederation, Ambassador, which has not the reputation of being a big spender, is around 20% of the Swiss GDP. And we have 1%. In order to maintain cohesion and solidarity within the Union, we need more transfers between the richest and the poorer regions. That's not always well accepted by the wealthiest, even though they are the biggest benefiter of the internal market and of the external trade relations of the Union. There are at least 9 other European countries who want to join the EU. Albania, Bosnia, Georgia, Moldova, Montenegro, Serbia. And there is Kosovo, not even recognized by 5 actual members. Then there are large and problematic states like Turkey and Ukraine. Ladies and gentlemen, since Putin invaded Ukraine, the European Union, besides the US, NATO, and others, made a lot of financial and military efforts in order to back the legitimate government in Kiev. Putin didn't achieve his goal to overthrow President Zelensky and to establish a pro-Russian regime in Kiev. But unfortunately, the Ukrainians will not be able to re-establish the status quo ante existing before 2014. Russia is a nuclear power, has almost 3 times the population of Ukraine, has the soft backing of important nations like China, India, Turkey, and others, which continue to finance Putin's war through trade. Even if we Europeans, and hopefully the Americans, must increase efforts in order to back and to arm Ukraine, there is at the same time the need to explore all possibilities of ending the killings through peace arrangement or at least a lasting ceasefire. In Korea, the ceasefire is lasting for 75 years. Which means that Europe will not escape to establish a new relationship with Russia and some other European nations. That will not be easy and not satisfactory from a moral point of view. But as we cannot change the geography of Europe, we must organize the best possible relations between all European nations. It is my firm belief that the new Helsinki or Geneva Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe is unavoidable. I close my presentation with a quotation from one of the very best diplomats the United States ever produced, George Kennan, who wrote in 1985 that, and I quote, "Nations have to admit that the validity and legitimacy of power realities and aspirations, to accept them without feeling the obligation of moral judgment, to take them as existing and inalterable human forces, neither good nor bad, and to seek their point of maximum equilibrium rather than their form or their repression." End of quotation. Please reflect on it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goebbels, for this food for thought that you put for the audience. Maybe we can open the floor for the first round of questions. There is a mic circulating in the room. Please introduce yourself and ask briefly the question. Oui, Monsieur Kalmas.
Thank you. It's working? Yeah. So, I'm Mr. Kalmas. I'm an ugly federalist. And I am a member of
Apologize a second.
On continue? Okay. So I am an ugly federalist, and don't worry, I'm not asking a question about the United States of Europe. My question is much more limited, and my English is not very good, so I must concentrate on my question. Just a moment, I'm changing my glasses. So, if we want to compete at the level of Americans or Chinese eventually, it is not enough to invest money, but it is necessary to develop a strategy of product, and not only by branch. In the 60s, John Kenneth Galbraith was already speaking of the technostructure, and we have now the result with the GAFAM. That means planification of private sector with strategical products. So my question is, we have not the tool for that. All the everything is done for competition and not to have monopoly in Europe. But my question is, and so I am speaking of public sector, not only, but specifically in this case, why are we not creating at the level of European Union a team of experts without decisional power, but proposing a strategy of product at the level of EU to compete effectively, to be a partner or a competitor with the States or the Chinese eventually.
Monsieur Kelmes, thank you very much for your question. I have a suggestion, because our keynote speaker is here. I suggest to keep the answer to this question at the very end, if you agree. Thank you. And now I have the pleasure and the honor to introduce the keynote speaker of today, Mr. Pat Cox. If you allowed me, I will tell you some words. It's not there. Yes. So Mr. Pat Cox was born in Dublin. He was a member of the Irish Parliament in the early 90s, and then he was elected in the European Parliament in 1989, and then re-elected in 1994 and 1999. Mr. Cox chaired the group of the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe, ALDE, of the European Parliament, and then he was elected President of the European Parliament in January 2002 for a 2.5-year terms. Mr. Cox carried out internal reforms in the European Parliament and has enabled it to carry out the work of the Convention of the Future of Europe. Mr. Cox represented the European Parliament in the Intergovernmental Conference on the Draft Constitutional Treaty of the European Union. Pat Cox is the winner of the 2004 Aachen International Charlemagne Prize for his parliamentary commitment to the enlargement of the European Union. Mr. Cox, the floor is yours.
Je vais prononcer mon discours en anglais, mais pour commencer un peu en français, il faut commencer avec mes excuses. Je suis très en retard. J'ai vécu une journée abominable à Zurich en arrivant un peu plus tard pour le vol, mais j'ai regardé le dernier quart entre l'aérogare et le vol. Donc, on a été très proches, mais malheureusement un peu retard. On est arrivé maintenant, donc heureusement que je peux prononcer un discours. Merci beaucoup. Permettez-moi de vous remercier et de m'avoir invité à prendre la parole ici ce soir à Luxembourg. Au nom de la Fondation de Jean Monnet pour l'Europe, je tiens à remercier nos hôtes et nos partenaires qui ont organisé cet événement. Et un mot aussi de remerciement particulier à l'Université de Luxembourg et à l'Institut Pierre Werner. Pierre Werner a eu une carrière politique extraordinaire et longue. Nos chemins ne se sont jamais croisés personnellement. Cependant, en tant que jeune économiste universitaire, enseignant l'économie dans ce qui est aujourd'hui l'Université de Limerick, dans le Midwest irlandais, j'avais accès bien en avant à Internet, à tous les documents clés de la communauté économique européenne par le biais du Centre de documentation européenne de l'université. C'est là que j'ai rencontré Pierre Werner et Leo Tindemans à travers les rapports respectifs, le rapport Werner de 1970 établissant un plan pour la réalisation progressive de l'Union économique et monétaire et son analyse ultérieure par Leo Tindemans en 1975. La réalisation de l'Union monétaire s'est avérée évidemment plus difficile et a pris plus de temps que prévu au début. Mais il ne fait aucun doute que le rapport de Jacques Delors de 1989 sur l'Union économique et monétaire s'est appuyé sur les bases posées par Pierre Werner. Encore une fois, je remercie tous ceux qui ont participé à l'organisation de ce soir, même si je suis tellement en retard. In just over 3 weeks' time, the forthcoming European Parliament elections will take place, and in 6 months' time, the US presidential elections will take place. I would argue that perhaps these are the most consequential elections of recent decades. Political scientists often characterize the European Parliament elections as second-order elections. This time, wherever you place them in the hierarchy of elections, second-order or not, the outcome is likely to be strategically significant, with implications for policy making at both European and national level, and indeed one can extend that through multipolarity to a wider global stage. The two main parliamentary groups, the European People's Party and the Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, lost seats and their former combined majority in the Parliament in the last 2 European Parliament elections. I think this trend is set to continue, although any diminution in the combined weight of both parties will be more marginal than dramatic on this occasion. But it does reflect a long-term, slow decline in voter support for mainstream parties and a growing level of party political fragmentation at both national and European levels. The right in Europe, with its focus on nationalism, identity politics, populism and culture wars, has grown slowly but surely over the past 3 decades. Where once they were ostracized, now they are normalized. A European Council on Foreign Relations study published earlier this year predicted what it called a sharp turn to the right in the upcoming European Parliament elections, suggesting, based on a poll of polls, that anti-elite and populist parties on the right are likely to top the polls in 8 member states: Austria, Belgium, Czechia, Hungary, Italy, Netherlands, Poland and Slovakia, and to be in second place in a further 9 states: Bulgaria, Estonia, Finland, Germany, Latvia, Portugal, Romania, Spain and Sweden. Collectively, these could constitute up to 1 in 4 of future MEPs. Their impact is likely to be felt most in anti-immigrant and anti-Green Deal policy preferences. But to maintain a sense of perspective, if they could amount to 1 in 4, we have to recall that 3 in 4 deputies will not be of the far right or populist parties. So for those who believe in a centrist capacity to manage Europe in an intelligent way, all is not lost, but is more stressed than before. The EPP looks set to remain the largest group and is primed, therefore, to retain the capacity to propose the next Commission President. Their nominee, as we know, is the outgoing President, Ursula von der Leyen. This will give them a leading agenda-setting role, but in a more complex, uncertain, and challenging parliamentary environment where the chemistry of consent will be less assured and more diverse and contested than before. The indications are, I say unhappily because I had the privilege to lead the Liberal group in the Parliament, that Renew, its successor group by name, and the Greens are likely to be the biggest losers in the coming elections, with the biggest winners being on the radical right in the Identity and Democracy group and the European Conservative and Reform group, ECR. According to the latest poll of polls, these two groups, ID and ECR, are set to grow, but perhaps by a bit less than was predicted earlier this year. They all, of course, as we know, sit to the right of the EPP. As you know, the European Parliament operates effectively through de facto coalitions, even where no formal coalition agreements exist. These are essential, since every group in the Parliament is and always has been a minority. Gaming the numbers offers a useful but incomplete insight into future power political coalition building. This is likely to be a variable mix, depending on the issues to be addressed, all passing through the EPP, but needing regular, if not constant, negotiation to accommodate a more diverse and contested political landscape. The pivotal MEP in the next Parliament, for the first time, is likely to sit in the EPP. For many years, the pivotal MEP through which votes might swing sat in the Liberal or Renew group or in the Greens. I think that will be a change in the future. It should be recalled, of course, that winning votes in the European election is not the same thing as winning power. We've seen, as I understand from seeing some headlines today, that Mr. Geert Wilders has finally found people willing to form a coalition with him in the Netherlands. I don't yet know who will be the Prime Minister, but it's very clear that they will have a much tougher line on immigration policy even than the recently adopted European Union Pact on Asylum and Migration. And I think that the real issue when we look at the far right is not only the question of number. They are, if one might describe them as such, rather a mixed bag in terms of their political preferences. For example, the Law and Justice Party of Poland, which is in the ECR, are strongly Atlanticist, pro-NATO, Russophobic, and pro-Ukraine. Mr. Orban has hinted he would like to join that group. Fidesz are pro-Russian, pro-Trump, hostile to supporting Ukraine, and have become spoilers inside the Western Alliance. Currently, Fidesz is affiliated to no group in the Parliament and will have, of course, two options afterwards: to sit with Giorgia Meloni in ECR group or to sit with Marine Le Pen or her colleagues in the Identity and Democracy group. I guess that one of the key issues here, and it's important to understand, if I look at the Italian situation, Fratelli d'Italia and Giorgia Meloni, there was an expectation she might be pushing against what I'd call orthodox EU policy towards Ukraine and Putin's invasion. In fact, she embraced the orthodox. So what we have to watch with the right in power is not only what they adopt at a strategic foreign policy level, but what are they getting up to at home? And what are they changing in terms of institutions at home is probably one of the areas where we'll see the most impact first. Let me turn now, if I could, to the second election I mentioned, November's US presidential election. This, of course, will be a rerun of the 2020 contest between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. A Biden win, I'm sure, will be a source of relief for most Europeans, but this should not be presumed to be a win for the status quo ex ante. NATO's future would be more assured under Biden, but a determined drive to reindustrialize and reshore US industry, aggressive anti-monopoly policy to curb corporate power, but different to EU competition policy norms, fighting climate change through industrial policy and not carbon pricing, and pressurizing allies, in particular the EU, to join joint actions to confront Chinese mercantilism and its growing technological ambitions will not be painless for Europe. There is a price to a transatlantic engagement. It's not so explicit, but it is implicitly, nonetheless, visible below the horizon, if we could put it that way. Moreover, I would argue that the comfort blanket of US security guarantees for a continent unsettled by the war in Ukraine, assuming it remains in place, will not be cost-free in terms of strategic policy choices. It is important, of course, as we look across the Atlantic, to distinguish between what we may wish for and what we may get. The prospect of a Trump presidency is growing. He is leading in polls in most of the swing states. And bear in mind, winning more votes doesn't win the US presidential election. Winning more votes in the Electoral College counts, and these swing states matter. The Republican Party is falling into line and increasingly uniting behind him. Biden is facing an increasingly divided Democratic Party over Gaza and the Middle East. He now is opposed by those in his party who think that he is both too hard and too soft on Israel. The prosecutions against Trump, coming so late in the electoral cycle, keep him in the spotlight while apparently energizing himself and his MAGA electoral base. If you look at Biden's economics, Bidenomics as he calls it, unemployment in the United States today is at its lowest in 54 years. But the electorate seems to be more focused on persistent inflation than on low unemployment. And so far, Bidenomics is not proving to be a winner with voters. In terms of who is trusted more on the economy, I find it staggering, but c'est la vie, Trump clearly leads in the polls. In terms of immigration policy, the Trump lead over Biden is even more pronounced. In terms of who people think is more competent to lead, in particular regarding the issue of age and capacity to govern, there's been a sharp shift towards Trump over the past several years versus Biden as compared with the beginning of Biden's mandate. Trump, as we know, does not like the EU, is volatile on NATO, is a global warming skeptic, a WTO agnostic, and is likely to raise tariffs on imports, including from the EU. He admires strongman leaders, counting among them Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and Viktor Orban. His second coming, I believe, would be more thoroughly prepared and enduringly conservative than his first. Polls, of course, are not outcomes, and the critical months are still ahead, and the US electorate may not have fully concentrated on what's before them in a few months' time. So nothing is inevitable in politics. But I'd say in political terms, if you've got a seatbelt in your car or on a plane, it would be a good time to buckle up at this stage. Let me turn, if I could, to a more general theme, to zoom up from the elections to some wider themes. I believe that the United States was and remains the indispensable anchor of the normative West. Whatever the West is, its norms, its ideas, its institutions. And I think as the war in Ukraine confirms yet again, the United States is still the arsenal of democracy. What the USA does matters. This year's presidential election is likely to be the most significant of our lifetimes, as I mentioned earlier, but not just for the USA, but I think for the idea of the West itself, its values, norms, aspirations, and choices. In a compelling essay, and I would recommend that you look at this, in fact, 2 essays of great length, written in the Washington Post some months ago by Robert Kagan, a senior fellow at Brookings Institution. Those of you who follow foreign policy will recall a very controversial piece that he wrote about 25 or 30 years ago, that Americans were from Mars and Europeans were from Venus. That's the same Robert Kagan who wrote these editorials in the Washington Post. He argues that Donald Trump is running against the system. If he wins, he will face the fewest constraints ever on a US president, and that the rights of his perceived enemies will be conditional and not guaranteed. Kagan's message, his words, not mine, is that the United States is drifting towards dictatorship. Liberal democracy, which was on the rise after the collapse of the Berlin Wall in 1989, is now in recession, with a growing number of autocracies, dictatorships, and illiberal democracies. Freedom House has reported the 18th consecutive year of democratic decline globally. The West is stressed by political, social, and economic cleavages following multiple consecutive crises. Anti-elite, illiberal, anti-system political candidates and philosophies are everywhere. This poses a question as to whether the West, in terms of inherited normative standards, such as liberal democracy, pluralism, minority rights, open markets, and international cooperation, is becoming actually less Western, a phenomenon brilliantly labelled by the Munich Security Conference in 2020 as Westlessness, the combination of restlessness and the West kind of going somewhere else. What is clear is that we've entered a new age of uncertainty. This at a time of spreading nuclear proliferation with diminished and contested strategic weapon safeguards. The world we live in shares both deep interdependence and deep vulnerability. China joined the WTO in December 2001, became the manufacturer to the world, lifted hundreds of millions of its citizens out of poverty, and through a steady flow of affordable goods, lowered inflationary tendencies in the West. Russia followed as a WTO member in 2012. The link between open markets, democracy, and international cooperation is a key normative aspect of the liberal world order. Back in 2000, the West's expectation on China was captured by Bill Clinton's final State of the Union address to Congress, where in essence, Clinton argued that China's admission to the WTO would enrich Americans and help convert China to freedom. Less than 2 decades later, Donald Trump, in his inaugural presidential address, blamed trade with China for creating American carnage. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping was tightening the grip of the Chinese Communist Party behind the Great Firewall of China. The gamble that enhanced access to global markets would democratize China has not paid off. The ground has shifted from economic embrace to geopolitical great power tension and rivalry. The fate of Taiwan could be its ultimate testing ground. For the EU, China's no-limits friendship with an aggressive Russia and its potential Trojan horse entryism into the EU through Budapest, as manifested last week, are sources of concern. And indeed, as we speak, Mr. Putin is being feted by Xi Jinping in China, underpinning the elevation of the no-limits friendship to the highest interpersonal and interstate level. The fate of multilateralism, as we've known it, is, I think, where the geopolitical stresses are now most evident globally. Again, I go to the Munich Security Conference report, this time of 2024, where they note that cooperation inside the existing order has been crowded out by competition about the order itself. Read reports of Putin's statements before he went to China, and it's clear that his aggression towards the West is by no means limited to fighting wars only. And part of that is about an aggressive attitude with China and others to reverse or to offer alternatives to that whole post-war Western model. The EU, of course, is heavily invested in post-war norms and institutions, and from the outset, our values and interests have been well served by them. The defence, reform and promotion of effective multilateralism, I think, is central to the EU's strategic goals, but that's going to be more challenging in future than traditionally it has been. An era of multipolarity, but with contested multilateralism, has arrived. The multipolar world is transforming into a multi-order world, which counts among its key influencers the leaders of the BRICS, and they are, as we know, Brazil, Russia, India, and China, South Africa, and now Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. And you've also got the Shanghai Cooperation Council, another format that is primarily Chinese created, and these are all there and working away, building alternative networks and potential structures. Of course, they're not a homogeneous bloc. Different states have different histories, different levels of development, and face different strategic challenges. They are non-West, but not all of them are anti-West, thus adding to the increasingly complex tapestry of forging effective multilateral relations. As the Indian Foreign Minister remarked in Munich this year, I quote him, "Good partners provide choices, smart partners make choices," suggesting a more transactionalist, a la carte approach compared to a more set menu of the past. Public opinion, politics, and governments in the West today, with the possible exception of combating climate change, are more focused on the vulnerabilities than the benefits associated with interdependence than in the early decades of the 21st century, and the EU is no exception. Throughout this century, EU-China trade has witnessed explosive growth, with the net balance of trade decidedly in China's favour. The COVID-19 pandemic and the heightened global demand for personal protective equipment was a lesson for the EU of the risks of high dependency on single-origin supply chains. This has been amplified by the shift away from excessive energy dependency on Russia following Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And there's now a growing appreciation of the need for diverse critical raw material supplies, whether for electric vehicle batteries or semiconductor chips and so on. Wishing simultaneously to promote free trade and to achieve more self-sufficiency has led to some linguistic and policy dexterity on the part of the European Commission, which now promotes open strategic autonomy and de-risking. During the current Commission mandate, I think the emphasis on autonomy has been stronger than the emphasis on openness. Compared, for example, to the Juncker Commission, which made the conclusion of an EU-US trade agreement one of its 10 priorities, I think there's been a sense of inertia around the negotiation of new free trade area agreements. There are some exceptions, but not with populist trading partners. And now we have an EU foreign subsidies regulation, which entered force in 2023. It has already been used several times against Chinese companies, and expect to see more of that. Indeed, as Joe Biden has announced recently, substantial tariffs on Chinese electric vehicle imports, expect the spillover not only from China, but from whatever the impact may be in lessening exports to the United States, probably to seek expression inside the markets in the European Union, adding to the pressure to make some kind of response in European terms. In the light of geopolitical circumstances and US pressure, European states, of course, as we know, are under increasing pressure to spend more on security and defence policy. Of the 32 NATO member states, including Finland and Sweden, 18 are expected to meet the target of 2% of GDP expenditure on defence this year. Putin's imperial ambitions already have resulted in war and undermined any prospect for a cooperative security order with him and Russia for the foreseeable future. The long post-Cold War European peace dividend has run its course. European states need to up their defence expenditure in their own collective security interests and also to support Ukraine. Collective security and defence inevitably are going to rank much larger in the coming 5-year mandate of the EU institutions than at any stage before. I mentioned earlier the rise of the right and immigration. Immigration has become increasingly sensitive as a political issue, especially because of the rise of the right that I've outlined earlier, and by attempts by the centre ground to reclaim some of their lost ground by picking the issue up as well. A new asylum and immigration pact has been agreed after years of negotiation. Its catchphrase is firm but fair, seeking at one level to burden share between member states and enhance border control while respecting EU values. Of course, these two things are not always easily reconciled. The EU is progressively aligning the asylum regime with migration management objectives through externalisation, placing readmission and return at the heart of EU migration policy, and linking external funding to the fulfilment of migration management objectives. Whether this will change the dynamics of migrant flows, only time will tell. Meanwhile, this remains among the most politically contested areas in the EU. One can add to this a growing right-wing pushback against the EU's Green Deal. I don't want to go into it, and I'm going to skip through some of the things I've still left to say to allow for some exchange of views, but political cycles have their own time horizon, and electoral preferences come and go. But the physics of climate change will not change. And the physics is known, simple, and straightforward. If you emit more greenhouse gas, it adds more to the layer of insulation around the globe, trapped in our atmosphere. And all of you know, if you add more insulation to your house, it should stay warmer. The globe is no different to your house. If you add more insulation to the globe, it gets warmer, and we know the costs of the extreme weather events that flow from that. So the climate global warming issue won't go away. It may go up or down to do with political preferences, but the underlying physics speaks through Mother Nature in increasingly angry ways. I want to touch on enlargement, and I'm not going to develop this hugely. I can leave a paper and people can look at it. I think enlargement has been one of the most transformative and positive policies of the European Union. If I go back 51 years ago, my own country, Ireland, joined as the poorest state region of the then European Economic Community. We've had, of course, enormous assistance through regional funds, cohesion funds in earlier years. We had the enormous benefit of access to the European single market, which is the primary pillar of the economic growth that happened. We've had fantastic support for the peace process in Northern Ireland. We had considerable understanding of the complexities of being the only EU state with a land border with the United Kingdom post-Brexit. And all of these are hugely appreciated. And we had some bumps on the road, very tough times coping with the austerity consequences of the Eurozone crisis. But net-net, it has been very positive. I would argue that generally enlargement has been very positive. Greece, Spain and Portugal underwrote and underpinned their new democracies post-fascism inside the Union. And if we take the Big Bang enlargement of 20 years ago, which was marked in the past week or two, we can see that it has had a transformative effect, particularly on the states of Central Eastern Europe. Most of those joined with 50% or less GDP per capita compared to the EU average. Today, that's up around 75%. And in the case of GDP per capita, it actually tripled in the case of Lithuania. That is an enormous success. But not only GDP, longevity, people live longer, the health system is better, the education standards are better. All of these things are part of their transformation, but part of Europe's embrace. Of course, I'm not naive. There have been downsides. Mr. Orban, and I won't develop the point, represents for me the biggest fly in the ointment of enlargement over those years. I think what the enlargement process shows us is that we should be positive about it, but not naive. And my guess is, as we look at the enlargement fatigue which we had now passing and enlargement coming back onto the strategic agenda, that one of the lessons we have to learn is to place much more intensive scrutiny on what I would call the Copenhagen criteria dimension, the pluralist democracy, the working institutions of state, and not just the market capacity alone. I think the accession treaties, whenever they come, and that's after a long process of screening, negotiation, etc., whenever they come, it seems to me they could be an opportunity, since they have to be approved by every state, to put in some additional capacity to guard against lapses from things that we value. That's a political challenge, but I think if we duck it, we save up problems for later, and so we have to learn lessons. But as I said, I'm essentially positive on all of that. A word on Ukraine. I think at this time of profound and unrelenting stress, I think Ukraine needs all the reassurance of our solidarity and of our openness in due course to embrace its entry to the Union. But it is, of course, a case apart in terms of complexity. If we take it in its 1991 borders, it would be the largest member state ever to join the Union. If we take it in terms of its economic structure, it has a much higher share of agriculture to GDP relative to the EU than anywhere else. And if we take its GDP per capita, it's by a large margin the poorest state across Central and Eastern Europe. So if you're very big, very poor and very agricultural, that means to do with EU budgets and current spending systems, you cost a lot. So two things have to be done over the coming period. One is that all these states have to start adopting and developing their capacity to implement the acquis communautaire. And that's an enormous transformation and cannot and will not happen overnight. But the other part is we, the EU, have to begin to get ready to absorb that challenge. And I think the two big pillars of that absorption are financial and budgetary on one part, and on the other part, institutional decision-making capacity. We don't want to end up in gridlock because we want to do the right kind of thing by near neighbours. So I think if I look at Ukraine today, one thing is clear to me, we do not need Ukraine to end up as a failed state and a zone of instability on the borders of the European Union. We have a European Union interest in stabilizing a future Ukraine, as much as Ukraine has an interest in stabilizing itself through engagement with us. I'm going to conclude, encore une fois, avec quelques mots en français. En anticipant l'avenir, je souhaite terminer par un hommage au passé. Revenons aux années 70 et à l'ère Pierre Werner, et en particulier au rapport McDougall de 1977 sur le rôle des finances publiques dans l'intégration européenne, où le concept d'un budget préfédéral de la CEE plus important a été présenté, mais n'a jamais été vraiment développé. Je pense qu'un débat honnête sur la nature et les besoins du financement de l'Union européenne est attendu depuis longtemps. Rappelons la réponse de Jean Monnet à la question de savoir s'il était optimiste ou pessimiste sur l'avenir de l'Europe. Il a répondu « Je suis ni optimiste ni pessimiste, je suis déterminé ». Et rappelons les mots et l'esprit de la déclaration Schuman, la paix mondiale, et j'ajoute personnellement la démocratie, ne saura être sauvegardée sans des efforts créateurs à la mesure des dangers qui la menacent. Merci de votre invitation et merci de votre attention.
Monsieur le Président de la Fondation Jean Monnet pour l'Europe, je vous remercie beaucoup pour vos mots, pour le regard que vous avez porté sur les défis de l'Europe dans cette approche géopolitique. Mais je vous remercie surtout d'avoir mentionné l'héritage intellectuel de Pierre Werner ici, dans un endroit qui porte son nom, d'autant plus que cette année, on marque le 25e anniversaire de la mise en route de l'euro, dont les fondations ont été imaginées par Pierre Werner à travers le rapport que vous avez mentionné. So, thank you very much, President. Now I really open the floor for questions. So the first question was addressed by Mr. Kalmus about the competitivity of Europe. Who would like to ask this question?
I need to pick that up quickly.
Yes, please.
I don't mind to respond quickly. I think your question deserves quite an in-depth answer. I would say that the consciousness of the need to do some of the things you have described has grown. And I would commend for your attention the report of Enrico Letta, recently done, outlining what he regards as the unfilled capacities still of the European single market, including an argument which picks up a thread from your remark, that some of the competition policy in Europe, which refused mergers that would make global scale capacity through merger and acquisition, is something he highlights as needing to change. So I think, who knows what happens to do with actual policy, but I think what he has done is provided a thoughtful roadmap to elevating Europe's ambitions to be more ambitious to do with its own single market, digital and industrial policy, and I would commend the report to you. Moreover, he remarks in the report that the European single market was created when the Soviet Union was still there, when China hadn't exploded in growth terms as it has done, and where Europe, as part of the global market, was a much larger player than it is today or than it will be tomorrow. And so he emphasized the need in that sense for Europe to be more muscular in its own interest to do with scaling up to these kind of multipolar challenges I mentioned. I haven't yet seen, I don't know if it's been published, I think perhaps not yet, the report of Mario Draghi on competitiveness, but I would be highly surprised if it doesn't have some overlaps with Letta. And if you look at the Letta report, you will see he went around a bit like you were saying. He talked to, I don't want to misreport, but he had hundreds of meetings at all sorts of levels. 400, thank you. So I don't know that it's going to happen, but I do know that it's on the agenda as a thought process. And I think when President von der Leyen brings a program to the European Parliament, which is going to be walking a bit of a tightrope politically, looking left and right, I think there will need to be some clear, hardcore European growth, competitive and employment possibilities baked into that. And I think Letta and Draghi will be sans les plumes, en effet.
Thank you. Yes, please, behind.
Hello, good evening. My name is Peter Cullen. I work in an administrative capacity only at the Court of Justice here in Luxembourg. I'd like to return to some remarks by Madame Calteux, merci beaucoup, regarding what she perceives as a failure to have engaged the younger generation, and she particularly mentioned certain statistics coming out of Luxembourg. What does she and what do the other panelists think would engage that population better in terms of concrete action during these next 5 years? And I'm thinking of the concrete achievements of Mr. Goebbels and others in Schengen. That's very obvious. Do the panels see something similar which could engage young people and counteract the populist narrative over this next period?
Thank you very much for your question. As I said before in my speech, I was really puzzled by the outcome, also coming from Luxembourgish young people, I must say. But for me, I think what young people want is to be proven the added value of the European Union with concrete examples. Buzzwords don't work. I mean, they don't care about open strategic autonomy. They don't care about competitiveness. They need concrete examples. So, there are a lot of examples in the recent communication about the achievements of the European Commission. I have it here with me. It's a whole book, but it's, I must say, really well done, the achievements. And I regularly, I dig into that when I am with young people to pick out some concrete examples of what the European Union has changed in a daily life of, for them especially. There are like the free roaming or capped prices when you phone your loved ones from another country. Erasmus Plus, one of these success stories. Discover EU, there is so much. There is the new youth portal, which has been put in place as a consequence of the Conference on the Future of Europe to allow young people to make their voice heard better today. I think they want to play an active role, and I think we have to give them the feeling that they can play that active role.
I'm an old white man, and I cannot speak for the young ones in our society, but I still have contacts with young people. And what I see, unfortunately, is that there are a lot of youngsters who take everything for granted. That's the main problem. They do not know how the world was before. They lived up with a handy in the hand, and they are looking at the handy, but they do nothing. They do not anything about the battle we had in the European Parliament in order to redress roaming. The same goes for crossing borders. If you tell a young one, but even 25 years ago, crossing a border, you were stopped by a policeman or by custom officers. They don't believe it. They never saw it. And that's one of the biggest problems, that we unfortunately live in a society which is spoiled. And a lot of young people are totally spoiled. And then they react to epidemic questions like immigration, like pro or anti-Islam and things like that. And that makes the political discussion so difficult nowadays, and explains why a lot of people are not too much interested in European elections. By the way, 41% of youngsters will not vote. 41. 85% of foreigners living in this country, and which have the right to vote for the European elections, will not vote too. 85%.
I think this question is, excuse me, I think this question is interesting, and I think answering it is complex. I share with Robert the disadvantage of excessive maturity to talk intimately about young people's preferences, although I have my own children and lots of grandchildren and have some sense of what they look at. I would make a number of observations. I recently had the opportunity at La Maison de Jean Monnet in Bazoches to meet with a very interesting group of young Spanish undergraduates. And they listened, to the likes of myself, the great and good, talking about things. And I said, look, let's forget it on day 2. We'll just talk. Tell us what you do, what you think, where you get your information. And notwithstanding the fact that they are in university, I was fascinated to see that most of them got most of their information about politics or Europe, if they took any information on Europe, on their social media accounts, and with short attention spans and limited amount of information being communicated. And they even talked about how little they had been taught in terms of basic pedagogy in school about where had Europe come from in a post-war sense. So I think there's a pedagogical challenge, which is one level. But I heard a very interesting talk by an internet marketeer about selling his products. And he said something which I found insightful and shocking. If you don't catch them, referring to his clients, in the first 3 seconds, you're dead. Politics, even if you do something silly or fancy to attract attention on TikTok or Instagram or all those things, doesn't lend itself to grabbing you by whatever part of the anatomy Donald Trump shouldn't be doing and trying to grab your attention. And so I think that's one element. I think the other thing is there's a tsunami of information today, but I think there's a deficit of communication. I think they coexist. The European Union institutions and the European Parliament produce tsunamis of information on every conceivable medium that is out there. And they do it in a user-friendly way in every working language of the European Union. But it doesn't penetrate. It doesn't come through because people are not looking for that kind of stuff. And I think what we've got in our public square today, and I'll stop with this, these kinds of meetings have an intimacy, an interpersonal quality, a level of engagement, comments, contest, challenge. The public square today is completely atomized and anonymized because the public square is somewhere on TikTok or Instagram or Facebook, but it doesn't do this so well. And where I noticed that in particular, I saw after the Brexit vote in Britain, lots of interviews with young people really upset that they felt their future had been screwed by older voters. And these were very active on all of those social media for the ones engaged. But when I looked at the voting data, the young cohort was the worst turnout of all the age cohorts in the UK. So having an opinion on Twitter doesn't count in a democracy if you don't go and vote.
Yes, I just want to say that young people are often very motivated by some topics. They are really keen to engage in some specific areas. We may be very puzzled, in fact, in face to things that we think that are really important, but they are motivated and very engaged in some different topics. If I look at my own sons, they are really motivated by what happens in Israel and in Palestine right now. It's something that gets under their skin very, very, very hard. So it's not that they are totally blind faced to some issues. They are just not triggered by the same thing that our generation have been interested in. I think, like you, that our network had failed to educate them. So it's the Key 12, the pathway that should bring this awareness. And I think that we don't have enough of this in the regular training that we have. There's many things that we should do, but it's unfair to the actual generation to think that they are not motivated and totally just on superficial issues. They are interested in things, really interested, but we have to find environment, something that is really that can have a lot of support from them.
If I may add, one element is disinformation, which travels extremely quickly through social media. It's a real threat. So indeed, I am working for the European Commission, and actually I am every day on Twitter. I also post a lot on Twitter, try to reach out to people, and I know that I miss a lot of hard-to-get ones. The hard-to-get ones, they don't go on Twitter, I know that, but we as a Commission, we don't go on TikTok, because that's a choice we have taken. And we are aware that we lose a lot of audience because we don't go on TikTok, but it's a conscious choice, and we know that by not going on TikTok, we lose the battle against disinformation, because disinformation travels a lot via TikTok. So I think to make up for that, we have to make young people aware, this awareness raising about the dangers of disinformation, because they get trapped very quickly. Because disinformation is always built around one truth, and then they make a big lie out of it, but you don't notice it. So everywhere, when I go and I speak to young people, I always say, before liking, sharing a post on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you go, also Twitter, please think about what you want to like. Is it really worth liking or sharing? It can be disinformation, so remain critical and cautious. It's very difficult. They are very different from us. We didn't grow up with social media, so for us it's also hard to understand where they are at. But I think we have to remind them of the dangers of disinformation.
Very much. We take the last questions. Yes, please.
Hello, my name is Adrian Nuta. I own a small consulting business here in Luxembourg. My question is surrounding startups and innovation. Europeans have always preferred to push big corporations to innovate and bring new products to market. But EU companies are on average 50 years older than the ones in the US, for example. And the leadership of these companies are even older. All this while true innovators and fast movers, the startups, are being suffocated by bureaucracy. So what can we do at the EU level for these startups?
And this goes on, yeah. The suffocated by bureaucracy bit is always worth exploring. You know, I can't deny that you have bureaucracy in the European Union. That is self-evidently the case. Not all bureaucracy, of course, is negative in terms of capacities and what it does. I've been fascinated over many years, and I guess Robert would have found the same in the European Parliament. We've had various stars come on the horizon to clean up the bureaucracy and get rid of the regulation. And wherever they went, they must have been shooting stars. They never left much of a legacy behind. And so there are elements there, but I do think the innovation question is one that squarely, it goes back to the earlier question, Europe now is very challenged by. There's an awful lot of innovative European companies, also at SME level, who find the terms available through the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States particularly attractive. And so apart from big companies swallowing up smaller ones through merger, if smaller potential high-growth companies choose to exit Europe for particular, not about the bureaucracy, but for the subsidy policy in the United States, I think there could be a danger in that. And then we have things here, I don't want to kind of deviate from the substance of tonight, but I'm the chairman of the board of 3 small and medium enterprises. And one of them is in one of the hard-to-reach sectors, steel and cement, where we want to clean up our act. And the interesting thing is we have an innovation fund which will spend money helping, and I'll just use the phrase, dirty industry to clean its act, but will not spend money helping clean tech to expand its act. And so that kind of thing sounds bizarre, but I mean, I'm not going to deviate, as I said, into the detail. So, I mean, I'm somewhere in the zone that you're talking about because I have some hands-on experience of it. And, you know, you hope that over time some of these anomalies can be addressed. But I do think if Europe is going to develop a more active industrial policy, that its capacity to release energies, its capacity to compete with the United States at the moment, I doubt that on cost terms we compete on a lot of things with China, given its scale, is severely challenged. And that's why I talked about earlier, all these global institutions that are post-war that we've relied on, WTO and so on, they're not working like they used to. And we still seek to be, as promoters of WTO, to be WTO compliant. I have to doubt that the Chinese electric vehicle industry loses sleep, or Xi Jinping or his people, about being WTO compliant. And so there's a real challenge about what I call the realpolitik of what do you do. And in the end, if you respect institutions, but they've been hollowed out from the inside, maybe you've got to drive your own vehicle to suit your own needs a bit more. I think these are the kinds of challenges that are going to be more difficult in the next few years than the previous 30, 20 years and so on, because the rules of engagement and the rules of the game are changing, are being challenged, are being contested, and are not being respected. So for those, we still have the WTO compliance requirement when we look at, for example, if we're going to have tariffs against Chinese car imports, we will still try to argue and get the data and show it's WTO compliant before they're applied. You can see in the United States, I guess for reasons between Trump and Biden to show who's more macho on China, that they're prepared to slap on tariffs come what may, irrespective of the rules, including that they help to write the rules.
Yeah. US, Trump and Biden stopped providing judges for the WTO panels. They are not in the capacity to give new judges about new regulations. They simply stopped it. Trump started it and Biden did the same. But if I may add a couple of things. I think we in the European Union, we try always to legislate. I have been 15 years member of the European Parliament, like Peter, I think also 15 years, same. We arrived at the same time and we left at the same time. But we always try to legislate. When something new comes, first idea, we need big legislation. In the other part of the world, they don't proceed the same way. They let new technology grow up and judge them by the results. We forbid. We have forbidden thermic motors for 2035. Nobody else in the world did it, and nobody else will do it, because there will be probably a lot of more progress to have more decent electric cars, but we will not be able to change 1.4 billion cars in the world up to 2035, and for the moment there are how many? 50 million electric cars or something like this. But there are 1.4 billion cars, most of them thermic, and will not be able to change this. The same goes for energy. In Europe, we have forbidden exploitation of shale gas. Now we are importing it, liquefied from the US. I could continue with a lot of examples like this which show that we over-regulate. And Pat, you are totally right. I know also some commission presidents and some commissioners who said we have to bring down bureaucracy. Yeah? But we always ended up having more bureaucracy than we had before. But on the other hand, there is one reality we have to face. That's what I said in my little speech. We are the smallest part of the world. In the year 1900, the European population was roughly a quarter of world population. In the year 2000, we were around 12%. Today, we are around 9%. And in 2050, we will be 5%, but only if we are open to immigration. That's the reality. We are a shrinking part of the world in the smallest semi-continent of the world, and it's obvious that we cannot beat everybody. We can try to be better, and I think there are some ideas in the Letta report, and I'm probably also sure that Mario Draghi will come with some refreshing ideas. Unfortunately for me, I have no more political influence. I'm out of everything. But if I would still be in the European Parliament, I would militate for having Mario Draghi as the next president of the Commission.
I would just like to reply briefly. Mr. Cox, you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act of the United States, and the reply of the European Union is the Net Zero Industry Act. I don't know in which field your business is active. IT. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the Net Zero Industry Act is about promoting those industries who want to invest into clean production of clean technology and renewable energy. But IT obviously is also a very strategic field. But I have been in the Chambre de Commerce this morning with a panel of SMEs from the greater region, so France, Luxembourg, Germany, and Belgium. And all of them said, indeed, there is too much burden, administrative burden, too many obstacles. And we had also one expert from DG Grow from the Commission, and he replied that, yes, we want to reduce by 25 administrative burden. This is really something super important for the next Commission because they really have to deliver on this commitment, which, as you said rightly, is not new. So many Commission presidents have committed to the same target. And as Lata says it in his report, we really need to live up now to this promise, especially for SMEs, small and medium enterprises, which make out of, I think it's 99% of the economic operators in the European Union. So a lot of expectations are put into the Lata report and into the implementation of the Lata report. And he himself, he says in his report, I urge the Council to delegate to the European Commission the task of drafting a comprehensive single market strategy addressing all the concerns of SMEs. And I hope it will be beneficial for you as well.
Thank you very much. Our event comes to an end. The real end will be a reception, which will be in the hall. You can also visit the exhibition on the history of European election created by the historical archives of the European Parliament and displayed for the first time after the inauguration in Strasbourg during the last plenary meeting of the European Parliament. So it's something very new. Allowed me, please, to warmly thank our outstanding speakers, Pat Cox, Marie-Hélène Jobin, Anne Calte, and Robert Goebbels, for sharing with us all these insights about Europe. And thank you very much to the audience for coming in such a large number to discuss and debate about Europe. Don't forget, Europe, it's about people, and the discussion from this evening has shown it. Thank you very much once again, and enjoy the reception. Thank you.